Okay, hi there, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for tuning in. My name's Andy Shepherd, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about Microsoft Sentinel. So just to introduce myself, as I say, my name is Andy Shepherd. I'm an Azure consultant at Azure. I've been here for a couple of months now, but I've worked with Microsoft technologies for quite some time. Started my career back in 2004, obviously working with Microsoft Server back in those days, but have been using Azure since its conception as well. So fairly familiar with the Azure portfolio, including Microsoft Sentinel. So what I'd like to do today is to talk a little bit about the Sentinel product, how you might go about planning a deployment, some of the potential data connectors you could use, and some best practice analysis and alerting type tools and processes that you could use. And then also talking about Sentinel Playbooks for some of the automation and some future suggestions that might help with expanding the Sentinel deployment after that initial phase. So I thought I'd like to kick off really with some FAQs. A lot of people ask similar types of questions to this when they're considering deploying Sentinel or any type of product really. Do I really need it? Hopefully I can answer that question fairly easily as we're going through. I'm a Yorkshireman as well, so obviously cost is always part of that question. You know, can we afford Sentinel? What are the benefits it's going to bring, and do they outweigh the cost downside? So if you've got a lot of non-Azure services as well, you may be considering whether Sentinel is the right tool. So hopefully we can explore some options that might help make that decision for you as well. How easy is Sentinel to deploy? Very, very, very simple. Hopefully we can show that as well in some of the demonstrations that we go through today. How to get the best out of the product as well, and just some tips and tricks on how to do that. And what do we do with all the data once it's in Sentinel as well, making sure that we're using that information correctly and being able to surface that to the right people as they need to without overwhelming people, which is the key really. So speaking about Sentinel or SIEM in general, really, obviously people nowadays, the way that they consume IT services from a corporate perspective has changed quite dramatically over the last couple of years. More and more people are working from home. More and more people are using devices that aren't necessarily connected to a domain, mobile phones, tablets, for example. And you need to have a security policy and deployment policy for those in place to be able to make sure that they're integrated with your corporate environment in a secure manner, and that you're able to demonstrate that from a compliance perspective as well, which is quite important. Obviously, more and more services connecting means more and more logs, more and more security information. What do we do with that data? That's where a SIEM and Sentinel specifically can come in. Without SIEM or Sentinel, then you tend to find there are a lot of sort of hidden alerts within a system. You might not even be aware of them, but a large portion of security incidents could go uninvestigated. And SIEM, and again, particularly Sentinel, is designed to help that process and cover off some of the aspects that a security operations team may have to do manually in some cases. So just talking about Microsoft in general, so obviously they have a large number of events that traverse some of their systems. This is some of the automation that Microsoft would apply to anybody that's using Sentinel. So they have a huge number of users that already consume their security products, which gives them a lot of inside information on how these services behave and what types of security incidents are valid security incidents and need surfacing to incident dashboards, that kind of thing. So as you can see here, there's over 300 billion original raw alerts. They're not necessarily security incidents, they're just events in general. Microsoft use their machine learning technologies to narrow that down to actual suspicious incidents, ones that need investigation. Again, there's another layer of machine learning that happens on top of that using probability and other types of services to narrow that down even further. And then they provide an even further step of analysis, again using machine learning to determine which of those incidents are useful for your organization based on the types of connectors and logs that you're capturing to make sure that the information they present to you in terms of an incident and the severity of that incident is as accurate as possible. And all of that kind of the first three layers there happen in Sentinel without you actually having to configure anything. So that happens behind the scenes. Microsoft use their own information and security baselines that they've built into the product over people consuming these products over periods of time. It's all anomalous data, so there's no customer information or organizational information contained within that, but they were able to use that for modeling and machine learning to understand which of those things are valid alerts and which ones aren't. So you can already see there how that could take quite a significant amount of load off a security operations team. And it also helps obviously filter out a lot of those false positives that could potentially surface and be investigated when they don't necessarily need to be investigated. So moving on to the planning phases of Sentinel. So there are a couple of things you need to think about before you even deploy, really. So what tenant are you deploying into? If you've already got a Microsoft 365 tenant, for example, that's got Azure AD syncing from on-premise, then it makes sense to deploy Sentinel into that tenant in an Azure subscription within that. And the reason for that is it natively connects to those services. If they're all in the same tenant, it works a lot easier and it's a lot simpler to sort of hook everything up together. So that's absolutely the way to go. If you haven't deployed anything to Azure before and you're looking at a greenfield deployment, then you probably want to include Azure Sentinel in your Azure landing zone deployment. And the idea is it's a prerequisite to anything being moved to Azure. So as you move things over, you simply connect them up to the log analytics dashboard, and then Sentinel is automatically enabled for those things. Which log analytics workspace you're going to use. So again, if you've got an existing tenant, you may already have a log analytics workspace that you can attach to. Microsoft recommend using one per region, per Azure region, that is. So you could potentially use an existing one and attach Sentinel to that. If you wanted to start afresh, then a new one is totally fine. Obviously, if you've got a greenfield environment, then you'd be creating a new one anyway. In terms of retention, the default for a log analytics workspace is 30 days. So all of the logs within Sentinel are stored in a log analytics workspace, and the default for that is 30 days retention. That you can extend that to 90 days without any additional cost. The cost for Sentinel is based in two particular ways. So one is the retention of data, and one is the amount of storage that those logs consume. Now, what we're saying there is the 90 days retention aspect is free. However, you would pay for the log storage that you would consume within that. So obviously, if you've got a higher retention rate, then you're likely to have more logs stored in the system for a longer period of time. Therefore, you would pay more from that respect. You can have these logs stored for a maximum of 2 years, and if you want to go beyond 2 years, you can use a Logic app to export that log information to a blob storage account, which you can then save for however long you wish at that point. It's also important to establish who is going to be supporting the Sentinel instance once it's been deployed. So that doesn't necessarily mean from an infrastructure deployment perspective. It's from an alerting perspective. Who is actually going to be responding to these alerts, and what is the best way to deliver any alerts to them so that they can handle it in the appropriate way. It's important to get that decision right from day one, because that will determine some of the setup decisions that you make when it comes to actually deploying Sentinel and setting up the alerts. You may want to go a step further, such as integrating with an IT service management tool or sending a Teams message to a particular channel, that kind of thing. And depending on which support team it is that's dealing with that, they might have a particular way of working that you need to accommodate within your Sentinel deployment. So once you've actually decided you're going to go with Sentinel, the first thing you need to look at is data connectors. There are some obvious ones which I would recommend anybody that installs Sentinel enables out the box. So Azure audit logs and security logs, you can capture those just simply by attaching your subscriptions to your log analytics workspace. Similarly with Azure AD audit logs, there is a connector for that which you can enable out the box, and Microsoft 365 or Office 365 again is available out the box, fairly simple to enable. And what I'm going to do now is just break out into the Azure portal and show you a little bit of what this looks like. So this is my MSDN subscription. So this is a test subscription that I can use for just demonstrating some of this. So you can see I have a log analytics workspace dashboard here that's set up. It's fairly basic. It doesn't have anything enabled on it. It's in a resource group called Sentinel, just so I can keep it all in the right place. But now we're going to enable Sentinel first of all. So you can see if I drop into the Sentinel section within the portal, nothing created yet. I click on Create Sentinel, select the log analytics dashboard and click Add. And while that's doing, it's important to note you do actually get a 31-day free trial of Sentinel as well. So if you've not used Sentinel before, you get the option to enable it and play around with it for 31 days without it costing you any money at all. And you can see I've just clicked on that, so my trial has been activated. And you get 10 gigabits a day. Quite difficult to hit that, to be honest, certainly initially. So you probably find that your 31 days doesn't cost you anything at all. So as I mentioned, the first thing that Sentinel wants you to do once you've installed and enabled that on the Log Analytics workspace is connect some data sources. So you click on this connect button here, and you'll see there's a huge list of potential connectors. You'll see immediately that these aren't specifically related to Microsoft as such. These can be from many different third parties, and as you look through the list, you'll see lots of different ones. Amazon Web Services, for example, That gives you a generic connector to your Amazon Web Service subscription. You can also connect to specific things like a storage account there. So that's S3 bucket, which is their equivalent for blob storage in Azure, in AWS, sorry. And you start to see some of the Microsoft Azure specific ones. These are available out the box. You can just connect the log analytics, connect each of these different things to a log analytics dashboard, and they're automatically connected to Sentinel once you've enabled Sentinel on that dashboard. And I'm going to show you how easy that is in a second for some of these services when I go back to the dashboard. If you pick on any of these, I'm going to pick the Office 365 one just so it's a good example of to show you some of the options you've got when enabling these things. As I say, I'm in a development subscription at the moment, so I don't have access to some of the security groups required to enable that. But you can see in there, it does give you an idea of some of the prerequisites you need to be able to install this. So for any connector that you click on, you can see how to install it and the prerequisites you need for that just by clicking on that particular link for that particular connector. And in this case, should I have had the right permissions, it's a simple case of checking these 3 boxes and clicking enable. It says no permission there at the moment, but that changes to enable once you've got the right permissions. And that's it. I'm then connected to my Office 365 tenant, and from there you can do a bunch of different things associated with Office 365 through Sentinel. And that's the same for most of these connectors in the list as well. As I said, there's 135 out the box. There's 123 out the box. So a lot of these are from third parties, Checkpoint, Cisco ASA there. It's worth mentioning the Syslog one as well. So obviously a lot of services use syslogging capabilities that aren't necessarily compatible with Sentinel out the box, third-party firewalls or switches, things like that, for example, or Linux services that are just running generic services within your environment. And you can see in here, it's quite easy to actually attach these to Sentinel. So Sentinel can accept syslogs, it understands them and is able to interpret them. All you need to do is add the agent on the particular box that you're capturing information from. So if it's an Azure box, it's an extension that you install on the virtual machine. If it's a non-Azure box, it's just an executable that you can download and run on a particular box. It has the log analytics workspace ID associated with that, so it knows where to send that information to. Yeah, so that's Syslog can be quite a powerful one because obviously quite a lot of services use that. So whilst it's only 123 services detailed there, you can see things like Syslog is quite versatile and you can actually install quite a lot of different services and features with that. ESXi is obviously quite an interesting one as well. If you've got a lot of legacy on-premise type stuff, you could potentially attach ESX to it as well and attach information from there. So I'm just going to jump back to my log analytics dashboard and just show you some of the ways to connect services in. So Azure-based services can be done through connectors. So Microsoft 365 one you just saw there. If, for example, you've got an Azure virtual machine just sat there that you'd like to attach into your log analytics workspace, you come to log analytics, select the virtual machine, select the virtual machine you want, and click on connect, and that's that done. You can, if I go back a step as well, you can also see that it's got things like Azure activity logs there. So you click on that, you select the subscription you would like to connect and click on connect. And all activity logs associated with that subscription will now be present in the log analytics dashboard. And because we've got Sentinel enabled on that log analytics dashboard, everything is available to us through Sentinel from that point onwards. So you can see how easy it is to, particularly with Azure resources, it's quite easy to integrate those into your Sentinel and log analytics deployment. Okay, so I'll just jump back to the slides for a short while. So you may have some on-premise infrastructure that you might want to connect to log analytics. That is totally doable. I mentioned at the start of the call, a lot of people think I do have a lot of non-Azure based services. Is it worth me deploying Sentinel? The answer I think is yes, because it's quite easy to integrate those into your Sentinel deployment. There are a couple of ways to do it. So you can just go down straightforward agent install on a virtual machine. It's a log analytics agent that's just dropped on a virtual machine, just an executable that you install on a non-Azure based VM. And that will need access to 4 particular URLs of a port 443 to be able to send data to a log analytics workspace. You may have some virtual machines on premise that you don't necessarily want to enable access to the internet for, and in which case you could use a log analytics gateway server. So this acts as basically a proxy server to aggregate the logs from all the different sources and send those up to the log analytics workspace for you. So you could drop that in a DNZ just so it's isolated from the rest of your environment and it's got access to the internet as well. It doesn't need to be a particularly powerful machine either. 2 vCPUs and 4 GB of memory is usually adequate. If you've got a large on-premise environment and you want to spread the load of that, you can obviously use a load balancer as well. So any type of load balancing technology you think is suitable is perfectly fine for that. An F5 or Pulse Secure Gateway, Traffic Manager, that kind of thing, anything like that is perfectly fine. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the baseline rules and ways of surfacing the information. Once you've got all the data into Sentinel, it's then what do we do with that data? And this is where the baseline analytics rules come in, and some of the workbooks that you might use to be able to view that information as well. So each of those connectors that you apply will have an associated group of analytics rules available out of the box. I've never come across one that doesn't have some pre-built-in analytics rules, so you should be able to pick from a list of those for ones that you think are relevant to your environment. Off the back of analytics rules, incidents are created as well, and that can either be just incidents within the Sentinel incident panel, or it can be workbooks, or it can be incidents that are sent to a service management tool on premise, for example. And workbooks are used to surface that information in an aesthetic way, so like a dashboard view for all the information, and they're interactive dashboards as well. So a lot of the graphs that you see and the visual representations of your data, you can click on different aspects of that to filter that down and delve a little bit more into some of the information that you can see there. It's designed to be a nice, easy way of being able to view what is essentially a large amount of logs in your log analytics dashboard. So obviously I mentioned at the start of the call a couple of connectors that I would recommend enabling out of the box. So Azure Active Directory and Azure Activity are obvious ones. Most people have those services enabled, and adding on to that nicely is Office 365. Fairly easy to do from all of those. You just connect them to your log analytics workspace or enable the connector, either of the two. And once you've got those things alerted, enabled, from an analytics perspective, when an incident is logged, you can then delve into that incident in a number of different ways. So it might be just text that you can read through to understand the scope of the error or the incident, or it might be using something like this impact map here, where you can see there's been an anomalous login there, and that's had interactions with a number of different services throughout the platform. You can follow each of those through. You can click on those and you can find out what that anomalous login actually did on each of those endpoints that it's interacted with, and again a little bit more information into each of those different things, which will help you determine the impact of the incident that you're looking at as well. Workbooks, in a similar way, most of the workbooks that you would initially enable would probably be out of the box workbooks. So each of the connectors that we've talked about so far has its own workbooks defined, and you can just enable those within your Sentinel deployment, and it will show you some useful information. This is an idea of what a dashboard might look like. So you can see there you get a lot of graph information, which, as I say, each of those bits is clickable. You can delve into that and helps you investigate the incidents in a little bit more detail in a visually appealing way, and it's easy to understand what that information is actually showing you. Hunting queries go a step further as well. So these allow you to, for example, if you really key feature of these, if you've got an incident happening right now and you're not entirely sure what's happening, you can use some of the pre-built hunting queries to actually determine what's happening within your environment at that time. And there's some examples there, the top one being suspicious network traffic patterns. So if something is happening out of the ordinary at the moment in your environment and you're not sure where, you could run that query and it would highlight anything that doesn't look quite right for you within the environment from a network traffic perspective at that time. So it's live data, it's happening right now, and it will help you delve into that in a little bit more detail. You can also write your own hunting queries as well, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the specific log analytics query language, which is called Custo query language. You can use any different types of services, languages that you're familiar with, Python, SQL, whatever you think is more appropriate for your particular environment. So we move on to Playbooks. I'm just going to jump back to Azure and just show you some of those things we've just talked about there. So obviously we enabled Sentinel when we last looked at Azure. Just going to jump into the Sentinel portal once again and show you some of the things we've just talked about. So you can see down the left hand side, we started with data connectors earlier. We're going to move on to analytics now, and you can see there are a huge number, once this loads, of potential rules that you can rule. If you click on rule templates, you get one that's active out of the box, but rule templates, there is a huge amount available to you, and you can filter these based on data sources. So if I had a filter here and select data source as the filter, And then I'll select Office 365, for example. Or in fact, let's go Azure Activity just to show you what that looks like. And then click on Apply. You'll be able to see then all the pre-built-in analytics rules that are available for Azure Activity Logs. And it's filtered that down for me nicely. You wouldn't necessarily want to enable all of those out of the box, but you might want to have a read through those and just determine which ones you think might provide some useful information for your environment. And it's also worth bearing in mind that once you've enabled those, you don't necessarily just have to enable those. You can come back another time, reevaluate, and perhaps determine if there's any more information that you might want to get from your data within Log Analytics or within Sentinel that might help you in a little bit more detail once you've got used to the product and once you streamline some of these alerts in a little bit more detail. Incidents. So I mentioned the incident queue. Obviously, there's nothing in the incident queue at the moment because I haven't got any incidents logged. I've only just enabled Sentinel, but this is where you would see all of the incidents. You can see I've got no incidents logged at the moment, but you would have an incident queue, and they would be organized by severity. So your high incidents will be at the top, and your lower level incidents will be further down. So I'm just going to look at workbooks as well. So I mentioned workbooks again, a lot of these available out the box, and you can see there's almost the same number of workbook templates available as there is connectors. So that's a good sign that there are likely to be connectors available for most workbooks available for most of the connectors that you would install. So yeah, when you decide there's a particular workbook that you'd like to see, you get an example of what that might look like to the right hand side there. You can click on View Template and it will show you what that looks like. Obviously, I don't have any particular data in my Office 365 tenant at the moment because I'm not capturing any logs, but you select these to be in relation to your particular workload. So this would be your you would pick between Teams, SharePoint, the other types of services that are enabled within your Office 365 deployment, and there will be a number of subtypes there that you could filter down on. As soon as you've done that, you will then see data within your environment, and you can investigate that. As I say, you can click around and filter as you see fit as well. Once you've enabled that, you can save that within your workbook directory, and it appears as a saved workbook, which you can then revert to anytime. And that's the same for any of those workbooks. So if I look at the Azure Activity one, should be, yeah, there you go. Again, similar sort of thing. You get an idea of what that might look like. You click on Save. That's how it appears in your saved workbooks there. Okay. Final thing I wanted to show you is hunting rules. So I mentioned that you can use these while something is happening within your environment. So a lot of these are pre-built in. They have categories assigned to them as well, so you can click on each individual one and narrow down rules that are relating to reconnaissance. I think that says, yeah, and a particular resource development, so you can see all the different ones. I've clicked on 2 now, so I've not got any information there. If you want to live stream, I mentioned, yeah, there's some built-in queries that you can use. You click on a query, click Run Query, and it will happen, and it will use live information and continue running that until you tell it not to, if you want to do the live stream aspect, which can give you some additional insights into what's happening within your environment at that particular time. Okay, I'm going to flip back to the slides and just talking a little bit about how you might respond to an incident within Sentinel. So I've showed you the incident dashboard, so you've seen what that might look like when you've got incidents in there categorized by severity of an alert. What you could also do, particularly once you get used to the product, is probably something that you would install at a later date, but you could actually trigger an automated response to an alert. So this could be as simple as logging a ticket with a team. It could be posting a Teams message into a channel. It could be dropping an email to a team, or it could go a step further as per the example here. So what's happened here is a user account has been compromised, and Sentinel has detected that and triggered an alert. And it's then created a record within an IT service management tool and posted a message to a Teams board. It can then go even further and take some actual action. So what we've got here is a condition that basically says, if this is approved by an email, then we can block the particular user, disable it in Azure AD, and we can also block the source IP of any malicious activity in the Palo Alto firewall. If it's declined, then it will close the incident in ServiceNow. But if not, it will perform those blocking actions and then leave the incident in the queue for you to review and take further action as need be. So we mentioned on-premise Windows servers and Linux servers. I also mentioned the Syslog connector when we were looking at the potential connectors. This is a good example of how you might do this on-premise as well. So in a similar way to a log analytics gateway, you could use a Syslog agent on-premise. The agent for this is installed within a VM, which is the image is available directly from Microsoft, so you can download it straight from the portal and install it on your what would potentially be a VMware environment or Hyper-V environment internally. You can then use that to aggregate logs from lots of different Syslog sources. So it could be Linux services across a number of different platforms within your environment. It could be firewalls, it could be switches, whatever it is that you may want to capture. And then you use a special installation of the log analytics agent on that particular Syslog VM, and it will ship those to the Sentinel workspace. It has a workspace ID associated with it again. And again, it acts in a similar way to the log analytics gateway of being able to provide you that facility to connect lots of on-premise functionality and services into log analytics. So just circling right back into the FAQs that I mentioned at the beginning, really, just to provide some, I think I've probably answered most of these questions as we've been going through, but I think, do we really need Sentinel? I think that every organization is subtly different, but I think in most cases it absolutely is a good thing to do. It's going to help most people with aggregating a lot of their security logs into one place. It's hard to argue against it, really, especially when you're looking at an Azure journey. I think that the connectors into Azure services are really simple to deploy, really easy to use, and it's really easy to see a value in that, in having all that information within one place where you can go to. And the integration into third-party tools is a no-brainer as well. I mean, being able to capture all of your on-premise sources, even AWS requirements, is really, really simple to do, and absolutely worth investing in from my point of view. From a cost perspective, I mentioned the different costing aspects of that. I can just talk you through some of the specific examples on how to keep an eye on costs as well, actually, which is worth doing. So obviously, log analytics workspace is where the cost for Sentinel comes in. So if we look at the log analytics workspace here that I've got set up, you can see I've got a usage estimate and cost analysis section here. Obviously, there's no data in here. I've only just enabled Sentinel on that, so there's very little to see, but you can see how you can keep an eye on your costs. It gives you recommendations as to what's the right pricing tier. You can do a minimum commit if you're ingesting a huge amount of logs, then you might want to consider some of the higher price tiers. Generally speaking, the pay-as-you-go, particularly initially, is absolutely the way to go, especially with that first 31 days being free as well. You can really get a sense of whether the product is going to give you any value during that first 31 days. And the fact that you can increase that retention to 90 days for free without incurring any additional costs is, from a retention perspective anyway, is a really good option as well. If you really want to, you can add a daily cap as well. So if you're ingesting too many logs on a daily basis, you can stick a daily cap on that from a cost perspective, which will stop any more logs being generated. If you want to go a step further as well, you can go into the cost management side of the portal and actually have a look in a bit more detail around some of the aspects of cost management that you may want to look at. So budgets is a good one. So once you've got an idea of what your expected spend is likely to be on a monthly basis, once Sentinel is deployed, you could set a budget alert on that to make sure you're not exceeding that. And if you are, you can take some action. So you can go in and potentially reduce that retention, maybe have a think about the different connectors you've got connecting and whether there's a way to streamline that data in any way, or other aspects like that. Again, cost alerts kind of hit off the back of budgets. Really, once you hit a budget cap, you can then see you can then receive an alert if you need to. Cost analysis. So this gives you some nice graphs on your expected cost forecast, so you can have a look at what your expenditure is like. You're able to see which different aspects of your deployment is actually costing money. So once I get some costs within my log analytics workspace, I would see that in this list there, and you'd be able to click on that and delve into that in a bit more detail. This is essentially a workbook associated with costs. So it's similar to what you workbooks that you'd find within Sentinel. So from a cost perspective, yes, I think you'll probably find it really depends on the number of connectors you've got installed. So the more connectors you add, the more logs you're going to have, and therefore the higher that cost is going to be. Certainly initially, if you're just doing a few connectors, then absolutely, I don't see the costs being anything to be concerned about. And you can use the tools I've just shown there to keep an eye on what those costs are likely to look like over a monthly basis as well. In terms of non-Azure services, we've talked about that, and it is quite easy to integrate those within Sentinel. There are a number of options, built-in connectors through the Sentinel portal, or using things like Syslog aggregators or log analytics gateway services to bring on-premise infrastructure in. And there's an abundance of third-party tools available as well to connect in. Even if you've just got an API, you can do an API call and bring data in through an API. So really, really easy. How easy is it to deploy Sentinel? I think we're certainly enabling Sentinel is very, very easy. It's as much as selecting a log analytics dashboard and clicking enable. It's what you do with it after that that takes a little bit more fine tuning and time. But generally speaking, because that initial deployment is so much easier than it could be in other scenarios. If, for example, you've got an on-premise appliance that you might need to install for something like Darktrace or something like that, there, it's not going to take anywhere near that level of effort. Which is a fantastic starting point for sure. So how can you get the best out of Sentinel? I think starting small is absolutely key. There is going to be a lot of information stored within Sentinel, and particularly the log analytics dashboards behind that. And to make sure that you're using that in an effective way, I think not overwhelming the people that are going to be managing that from day one is a good starting point. So start with a few fairly obvious connectors, like I've said, the Active Directory one, the Office 365 one, and the Azure activity logs. And then start to first of all, fine tune those, and then start to expand out to maybe your on-premise infrastructure or some additional third-party products that you've got that have built-in connectors available. And then once you've got those fine-tuned, you can start to look at any bespoke connectors that you might need to create, that you might need to connect to an API for, or that kind of stuff. And what do I do with the data once it's in Sentinel? I think the key thing really is Sentinel has a huge amount of built-in tools that you can use. So the hunting, the analysis, and the workbooks. Make sure you're using those to the best of your ability once they're in, and once the data is in there, and then you can start to streamline that process of being able to use Sentinel and making it nice and simple to use and go through, and keeping the effort levels as low as possible that the security operations team are required to use to actually manage the product is key, really, because as soon as it becomes unwieldy, they're not getting the value from the product, and it soon becomes really difficult to justify. That's everything I wanted to talk about today. Just a quick still of some useful links that might be helpful there. So the Azure Sentinel pricing guide is available on the Microsoft website, as you'd expect. Some good workthroughs for installing Linux and Windows agents on-premise desktops if you want to. Some tutorials and available data sources for you there as well. Okay, thank you very much for your time. I hope that was useful. I hope to talk to you all again soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.